Imagine waking up one morning to find the flag flying over your town has suddenly changed. Not because of a revolution, not because of a full-scale invasion, but because of a war started by a pig. No, really. A single, unlucky pig, rooting around for potatoes, set off one of the strangest international crises in history. And by the time the dust settled, the borders on the map had literally shifted overnight. This is the story of the Pig War, the weirdest war in history that almost ignited a world conflict and changed the fate of an entire region, all without a single shot being fired at a human being. Let's rewind to the summer of 1859. Picture it. Dense forests, rocky shorelines, and mist-covered islands straddling the border between the United States and British North America, which we now call Canada. Specifically, we're on San Juan Island, a small patch of land sandwiched between Vancouver Island and the mainland United States. At first glance, San Juan seemed like the last place on Earth to spark an international incident. It was remote, sparsely populated, and, here's the kicker, jointly occupied by both British and American settlers, thanks to a diplomatic loophole so confusing that even the diplomats couldn't agree on what the actual border was. Now, to really understand how bizarre this was, you have to know about the Oregon Treaty of 1846. Signed between the U.S. and Britain, it was supposed to end decades of squabbling over the Pacific Northwest. The treaty said the border would run, along the 49th parallel, to the middle of the channel which separates the continent from Vancouver Island, and then southerly through the middle of the said channel. Sounds simple, right? Except there were two channels. The Haro Strait to the west, and the Rosario Strait to the east. Which one was the middle? Depends on who you asked. And right in between those two straits sat San Juan Island, claimed by both nations and, for over a decade, occupied by both their citizens. So by 1859, the island was a living, breathing paradox. You had American farmers working the land, British employees of the Hudson's Bay Company running a sheep ranch, and everyone sharing the same space, each side convinced they had the law on their side. It was like a diplomatic game of musical chairs, with the music supplied by sheep bleating and axes chopping wood. Enter Lyman Cutler, an American settler who just wanted to grow potatoes in peace. One June morning, Cutler awoke to find a large black pig rooting around in his garden, munching away on his carefully cultivated crop. This wasn't the first time the pig had trespassed. The animal belonged to Charles Griffin, the British superintendent of the Hudson's Bay Company, who let his pigs roam free. This time, Cutler had had enough. He grabbed his rifle, took aim, and shot the pig dead. It sounds absurd, but what happened next reads like a script for an international farce. Cutler, feeling vaguely guilty, offered Griffin $10 in compensation. Griffin, outraged, demanded $100. The two men argued. Voices were raised. Neighbors got involved. And before anyone could say, diplomacy, the British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler for destroying company property. The Americans, incensed at the idea of a fellow citizen being hauled off by the British, called for military protection. Now, you might be thinking, how on earth does a dead pig lead to a military standoff? But that's exactly what happened. Word of the incident raced across the water to the American mainland. Local officials, eager to assert U.S. sovereignty and protect their settlers, sent for military backup. Enter Captain George Pickett, a name that would later become infamous at Gettysburg, who landed on San Juan with 66 men of the U.S. Army. Their orders were simple: defend American citizens against British interference. The British, of course, were not about to let American soldiers camp out on what they saw as British soil. They sent 3 warships, bristling with cannons, to anchor off the island. At its height, the standoff saw nearly 500 American soldiers facing down over 2,000 British naval personnel. All of this, remember, because of one unfortunate pig. For weeks, tension simmered. The soldiers dug in, guns at the ready. The British warships' cannons were trained on the American camp. Officers on both sides exchanged tense, formal letters. One wrong move, one panicked shot, and a war between two of the world's most powerful nations could have erupted. All over a porker with a taste for potatoes. But here's where the story gets even stranger. Despite all the saber rattling, cooler heads prevailed. Both sides were under strict orders: don't fire the first shot. And they didn't. Instead, the British and American soldiers spent their time in a bizarre sort of armed coexistence. They traded stories, shared meals, and even held joint celebrations. On one occasion, British troops invited their American counterparts to a 4th of July picnic, complete with toasts and fireworks. Imagine that. Two nations on the brink of war, their soldiers sharing whiskey and singing songs, while their governments argued over a line on a map. Back in Washington and London, officials were mortified. No one wanted a real war, not over an island, and certainly not over a pig. President James Buchanan dispatched General Winfield Scott, the hero of the Mexican-American War and one of the most respected military men in America, to broker a peace. Scott sailed to the Pacific Northwest and convinced both sides to scale back their forces to a token presence. One small camp each, no cannons, no warships. And so, for 12 years, British and American soldiers literally camped side by side on San Juan Island, an uneasy truce maintained by shared boredom and the memory of that ill-fated pig. But the question of the border still hung in the air. Who, in the end, would control San Juan Island? The answer came not from the barrel of a gun, but from the pen of an arbitrator. In 1871, the United States and Britain agreed to let Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany decide the matter. After months of deliberation, the Kaiser ruled in favor of the United States. On October 21, 1872, the British lowered their flag for the last time. The border shifted overnight, and San Juan Island became American territory, just like that. So, how did a dead pig change the map? The Pig War, as it came to be known, stands as one of history's most bizarre conflicts. A war with no battles, no casualties, and no heroes or villains. Just a lot of angry farmers, bewildered diplomats, and bored soldiers. Yet its consequences were real. The peaceful resolution set a precedent for settling future border disputes through arbitration, not bloodshed. It helped cement a long-lasting peace between the United States and Canada. A peace so enduring that the U.S.-Canada border is now the longest undefended frontier in the world. But let's step back for a moment. What if things had gone differently? Imagine, for a second, a world where the first shot had been fired on San Juan. Where warships unleashed their broadsides and armies marched through the Pacific Northwest, all because of a border so poorly defined that its own creators couldn't agree on its meaning. How many lives would have been lost? How different would the map look today? Sometimes, it's the smallest sparks, the most trivial incidents, that threaten to light the biggest fires. The Pig War is a reminder of just how fragile peace can be, and how easily history can pivot on the most unlikely of events. And yet, the story is also a testament to the power of restraint. Both sides, for all their bluster and bravado, recognized the absurdity of the situation. Officers who might have been enemies instead became friends, or at least, friendly rivals, while their governments found a way to save face and step back from the brink. In a century marked by so many bloody wars, the Pig War is a rare example of conflict averted, of reason prevailing over rage. It's easy to laugh at the idea of a war triggered by a pig. But how many times has history turned on chance meetings, petty grievances, or simple misunderstandings? Think of Archduke Franz Ferdinand's fateful drive in Sarajevo, the Boston Massacre's snowball, or the War of Jenkins' Ear. Named, quite literally, after a severed ear. The Pig War belongs to this strange pantheon of accidental origins, where the absurd becomes the engine of history. And what of the people who lived through it? For the settlers of San Juan Island, the outcome was life-changing. Overnight, their allegiances shifted. American and British families who had once eyed each other with suspicion became neighbors under a single flag. The Hudson's Bay Company packed up and left, while American settlers expanded their claims. The island itself, once a remote outpost, became a symbol of peaceful compromise. Even today, you can visit the old camps, English camp and American camp, where soldiers once stood watch, waiting for a war that never came. Every year, locals reenact the raising and lowering of the flags, a gentle nod to a time when the future of the island, and perhaps the entire Pacific Northwest, hung on a single, fateful shot. The story of the Pig War has faded from most textbooks, overshadowed by bloodier, more dramatic episodes. But for those who know where to look, it's a reminder that history isn't just grand battles and famous names. Sometimes, it's about the ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, and the strange, sometimes hilarious, sometimes terrifying events that shaped their world. So next time you see a map, remember, Those borders weren't set in stone. They were drawn, and sometimes redrawn, by the oddest of circumstances. In the case of San Juan Island, all it took was a hungry pig and a patch of potatoes to move the lines that define nations. If you enjoyed this dive into one of history's weirdest wars, let us know in the comments, what's the strangest conflict you've ever heard of? And if you want more stories like this, where the absurd shapes the world in ways no one could predict, make sure to subscribe to History Owl. We've got plenty more tales where history gets weird, wild, and wonderfully unexpected. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next adventure.